The reception that SpongeBob Season 9 has received intrigues me. Most people have agreed that the first half was nowhere near as strong as the second half, still having a lot of elements that plagued the dark era of the show. However, this was the season that marked Hillenburg's return after his near decade-long absence in the show, and it also aired around the time that the second movie came out in theaters. And while that movie might not be as strong as the first one, as I said before, it was probably the best thing to come out of the franchise in a long time. And after that, it felt like that the show was really starting to return in quality. Sure, it was not exactly at the quality of the first 3 seasons, obviously, and they still snuck in some really bad episodes. But out of all the seasons I reviewed on this channel following my pre-movie review, this one actually has my favorite selection of episodes. In fact, some honorable mentions go out to License to Milkshake, The Executive Treatment, Pull Up a Barrel, What's Eating Patrick, and Two Thumbs Down. Of course, I had to narrow down my top 5, and that was no easy task. But before we get to that, we obviously have to take a look at the worst episodes of this season. And of course, as with most lists, it's all based off of my opinions, and you may disagree with me, and that is completely understandable. But anyways, let's just get the worst list over with. SpongeBob Long Pants. In this episode, SpongeBob purchases a pair of long pants, which makes him look more mature and sophisticated. So much so he ends up fading away from his character, quitting the Krusty Krab, getting his driver's license, and making friends with fancy millionaires. But he soon realizes that being mature isn't all it's cracked up to be, and decides to go back to his childlike nature. If I could sum this episode up in one word, it would be stupid. And not in a good way. I've never been a fan of those stories where one minor change to a character makes them completely unrecognizable. And while I don't think this episode follows the concept quite exactly, it was still pretty annoying. Most of the scenarios SpongeBob goes through are very far-fetched. Like, you expect me to believe that SpongeBob managed to get his driver's license just because he had long pants on? Yeah, kiss my ass. At least we did get a funny moment with Mrs. Puff.
Lock your doors, bar your windows, it's the end of the world!
But I think what really irked me about this episode is the whole idea of how being an adult sucks and being a kid is better, which I think was handled a lot better in Mall Girl Pearl. This episode could have had a moral about maturity not being easy to get through, and it would take a little bit of getting used to. But this episode just portrays adult life as a negative and boring lifestyle. I can understand the scene with a sophisticated party, but the scene with the movies are kind of insulting. I mean, just because SpongeBob wears long pants, he's too mature to see the Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy movie. Hey, I'm a 20-year-old man and I got to go see the Mario movie. There is no reason you can't let SpongeBob go see the movie. Even the Academy would say that this is stupid. In 2022.
Because animated films make up some of our most formative movie experiences as kids.
So many kids watch these movies over and over.
And over and over and over and over and over.
I see some parents out there know exactly what we're talking about.
This episode is just dumb. You'd be better off watching To Square Pants or Not to Square Pants. At least I'll give that episode was a lot funnier, particularly in the final third of that episode. SpongeBob Long Pants just has very little to offer, so it's no wonder why it made my worst list.
In the galley with you, Mr. Squidward, and start cooking.
But Mr. Krabs, why?
Well, just look. SpongeBob's got long pants on, and you've got none.
The Fishbowl. Sandy decides to attempt a study about the underwater lifestyle of the people of Bikini Bottom. So she attempts to observe SpongeBob and Patrick, but because they take notice of the camera and microphone, she has to do the observation without them knowing about it. And this gets out of hand when Patrick is put in charge. I have very conflicting feelings about Sandy as a character. On the one hand, I think she's a good friend to SpongeBob and Patrick, and her charisma can make her such a fun character. But on the other hand, there are times where she can be a bit reckless. And this episode is no exception, as she sees her own friends as test subjects. And the whole observation isn't even that fun to watch, as we end up having to watch the Patrick shenanigans that made him so infamous from seasons 6 through 8.
There's only one fair thing to do.
What's that? Patrick, you call that fair?
I'm in charge!
Now, I wouldn't say it's as bad as those moments because Patrick does kind of admit fault during the end. But it's still incredibly tedious to get through because we had to watch him being an asshole to his best friend. All because Sandy put Patrick in charge while she was observing them. And it doesn't help either that Sandy doesn't actually learn her lesson as she starts to observe Squidward now. Like, he had no relevance in the main plot, and yet he was still the best thing about that episode. Like, it was kind of rare to see Squidward act like this naturally, and it was a nice novelty.
One cone, please.
Oh, look on!
But everything else I had to endure in order to get to that is pretty much painful. While this may not be Sandy's worst appearance in the show, don't worry, I'll tell you when we inevitably get to that. The Fishbowl is still a really bad episode.
Hey, my ice cream is melting all over your hand.
Ooh, I'll fix that.
Patrick, you are making very poor choices!
Don't you backsass me. I'm in charge, and you have to do what I say.
Squid Baby. After suffering a severe blow to the head, Squidward ends up with the mind of a baby. Now SpongeBob and Patrick have to take the responsibility of making sure he's safe from harm. But taking care of Squidward as he acts like a bratty baby is quite the task, especially with how he needs to perform his duties at the Krusty Krab. I have very picky tastes when it comes to babies in media. Sometimes they can be pretty cute and charming to watch, but sometimes the novelty can wear off pretty fast. And we also had to endure all their brand of potty humor that they're known for. I'm looking at you, boss baby. And on top of that, this is another Squidward torture episode. Great. I am so burnt out from all these Squidward torture episodes. Again, if you're gonna go for some schadenfreude, make sure it's justified. If you're gonna torture people for the sake of torturing them, it's gonna draw people away. I just have nothing else to say about this episode. It's just Squidward torture, but with him as a baby. Also, what happened to SpongeBob and Patrick's parenting skills from Rockabye Bivalve? Like, you went from this to this? Whatever, you know this episode's bad, so let's just move on.
Now you try.
Can't be good.
This game's kind of dangerous.
Mutiny on the Krusty. A rip current is blowing over the Krusty Krab and everyone is anxious that they'll be caught in it. But Mr. Krabs refused to let the customers leave the restaurant regardless if they're at risk or not. They soon start a revolt on Krabs as they're caught in the current, and eventually he gets separated from everyone else and they all find themselves in an exotic forest. Most of Mr. Krabs' appearances can be a bit of a coin flip, no pun intended. Sometimes his cheap nature can make him funny at times, but it can also make him look really greedy. And this episode might just be the worst offender. Not once did I find any of his antics all that funny. And the fact that he acts like this throughout the entire episode is even worse. Like, the only real reason he helps everyone out is just so he can get paid. I get he's supposed to be cheap, but that doesn't make it funny. In fact, I was mostly siding with everyone else who was against Mr. Krabs. And the fact SpongeBob had the audacity to defend him is even more infuriating. Like, he's just acting like a suck-up at this point. I'd say the joke with the hat patty was kind of funny, but other than that, this episode just feels like a waste of time. And it's easily the worst Mr. Krabs appearance I've seen this far.
Well, that was anticlimactic.
Maybe he'll make the monster sick.
Okay, who had their money on Captain Squidward? Pay up.
Little Yellow Book. In this episode, Squidward comes across SpongeBob's diary and decides to take a look into it and learns his deepest secrets. Eventually, the rest of Bikini Bottom gets involved in reading his diary, and when SpongeBob realizes what everyone's doing, he runs out in embarrassment and everyone starts to point the fingers at Squidward as he ends up paying the consequences. How this episode manages to do so many things wrong is ridiculous. I hate how Squidward has no problem reading SpongeBob's diary behind his back, and the fact that he actually exposes them is even worse. I will admit that some of them were kind of funny. Like, the amount of memes of SpongeBob acting like a chicken that spawned is hysterical. Oh, and also that innuendo with SpongeBob taking a bubble break was also kind of hilarious. A little adult humor just gets me. But then SpongeBob finds out Squidward read his diary. And now all of a sudden the Bikini Bottomites hate Squidward for reading his diary. You'd think the consequences Squidward would go through would make the episode more satisfying since now the torture feels justified. Except for one problem. Squidward wasn't the only one at fault. Everyone at the Krusty Krab was listening in on it too, and everyone was even exploiting SpongeBob's secrets. Everyone in Bikini Bottom is acting like hypocrites. This makes the whole Squidward torture harder to swallow because he's being singled out. You could have actually made a Squidward torture-centered episode justified, and yet you still f*** it up! Ugh. This episode is just terrible. It's not the worst Squidward torture episode I've seen, but it's still just bad. And I'd easily call it the worst episode of Season 9.
What do you think of Mr. Krabs' new plaid kilt?
Plaid?
Hey! You don't have to be nasty about it.
So those are my least favorite episodes of Season 9. Thankfully, this season is a bit more merciful with some of the better episodes. As I said before, I did really like a lot of the episodes from this season. Now, it was a bit difficult for me to decide what my favorite episodes of the season were, but I think I feel comfortable with my top 5 list, so let's take a look at it. An urchin! In this episode, SpongeBob comes across an urchin infestation, and now he, alongside Squidward, Mr. Krabs, and later Plankton, have to work together to rid the urchin of the Krusty Krab. They try to exterminate the urchin, but that fails. But when they try to seduce the urchin away, they soon come across more urchins, and now they have to rid them as well. Now, aside from SpongeBob, one of my favorite cartoons growing up as a kid was Tom and Jerry. I always loved watching the zany actions and slapstick comedy of this dynamic duo. And the characters are all so enjoyable that I honestly don't know who to root for. Which is a positive since at times they try to make us favor one over the other. Do I think it's better than SpongeBob? The answer's debatable. It's another IP that went downhill over the years that passed, and the quality of most of their products can be hit or miss at times. I mean, they managed to have one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my entire life. But it's still a franchise I hold in high regards, and one of the many reasons I'm a fan of Schadenfreude. And this episode kind of gives off a similar vibe. The comedy in this episode is almost on point, with every single joke managing to get a laugh out of me. And the action and slapstick in this episode really had my attention for a while. And dude, that ending was so hilarious. Seeing Mr. Krabs have SpongeBob go so far that he ends up back at the Krusty Krab and releasing the urchins back there had me laughing so hard. I know, it pretty much puts them back in the same situation they were in earlier. But it's still funny! It never felt like it was wasting my time because I found it so enjoyable. In fact, that's the best word I can use to describe this episode. Enjoyable. If that's the kind of episode you're looking for, then I say give this one a watch.
Whew, that was close. Thank goodness no one noticed the urchin.
Bulletin Board. To let the customers express how they felt during their mealtime at the Krusty Krab, Krabs puts up a bulletin board to leave messages and feedback. But an unspecified customer under the name P*7 writes hurtful messages on the bulletin board. This correlates into more customers writing harmful messages on the board, and Krabs decides to have the board removed. But everyone, including SpongeBob, stops him. Okay, the mystery behind who P*7 was really dumb. Right from the moment I saw the name, I immediately knew it was Patrick. Like, if the staff really thought they could get away with this, I'd be insulted. But that's really the only drawback about this episode. I think what really makes this episode stand out is the commentary on social media. I'm not really the best person when it comes to discussion. At times I feel like I unintentionally say things wrong, or misunderstand what people are saying, and I fear I often give people the wrong idea. Sometimes our words can hurt others regardless if they were intentional or not. And I think this episode does a good job at getting across that. And on top of its allegory, the episode is also really hilarious. There's not a single time I groaned at any of the jokes. They all managed to get a laugh or a chuckle out of me.
Pineapple wanted delicate flower. Come in, delicate flower.
I am not answering to delicate flower!
I would have probably placed this episode a lot higher if it wasn't for that one issue. But regardless, I still really like this episode. It's both funny and has a great allegory.
Squidward tentacles should never be allowed behind a cash register. P*7. Oh, that is it. Why can't any of these yokels understand I'm working here ironically?
Jailbreak. Plankton is doing time in Bikini Bottom jail, and he soon discovers that every prisoner respects him as the maker behind Chum, which the prisoners use in their crimes. So Plankton devises a plan to get all of his inmates out of prison in exchange for them helping to steal the Krabby Patty formula. This is another really enjoyable episode. Once again, we have an episode where Plankton was in prison, but this time we actually put more focus on that. And I know I said this with dozens of his other plans, but this one was really good. It's cool to see him take advantage of the people who respect him. And he doesn't try to double cross them only for it to bite him in the ass. He sticks with the deal he made with all of them throughout the entire episode. Maybe a bit more could have been done with them having to steal the formula, but it could have been a lot worse. I'm not normally a fan of the authorities in the SpongeBob universe, and I'll explain more in detail why, but all I'll say is they give Grand Theft Auto's police a run for their money. But here, they're actually kind of passable. I mean, they actually managed to have the funniest joke in this entire episode. In fact, that's another thing about this episode. It's really funny. I know I say that a lot, and I get humor is mostly subjective. And I may not be the best critique of comedy, but I still found myself laughing at a lot of these jokes. Even from the smallest little detail, they managed to get a chuckle out of me. All in all, I really love this episode. Is it the best Plankton-started episode of the season? Well,
I mean, the file.
What? The file? Well, I'm glad you're not the baker in the family. The file? Who would put a file in a cake?
Karen, you've got to get me out of here!
Plankton's pet. After dozens of failed attempts to steal the secret formula, Karen suggests Plankton should do something to get his mind off the secret formula. SpongeBob suggests Plankton should get a pet, so he gets a pet amoeba and names it Spot. And after getting to know him for a bit, Plankton begins to train Spot to retrieve the Krabby Patty formula, which backfires and results in him punishing Spot and he runs away. I loved this episode. After a few episodes where Plankton is trying to steal the Krabby Patty formula, we actually have an episode where that's not the main focus. Sure, I don't think it was the first time we got this, but that doesn't change the fact that this episode was really entertaining. Sure, the story isn't really anything all that special, but its simple nature is what really makes it good. Watching Plankton and Spot bond with each other is really enjoyable to watch. And not once does it feel like it drops in quality. Every single thing they do puts a 10-wide smile on my face. It's just so wholesome to watch. On top of that, the humor in this episode is also on point. The opening was pretty hysterical, and the different ways Plankton trains Spot is also really hilarious. Also, the fact that Spot so easily got the Krabby Patty formula without a hustle had me laughing on the floor, mainly with how it's presented.
I'd like a large. What was that?
Didn't see it, don't care.
Like, I'm having a hard time putting this into words. I just love it so much. Plankton and Spot were really enjoyable, and watching them bond was really wholesome. It's easily the best Plankton-centered episode we got in a while. I don't think it's my favorite Plankton-centered episode following the first 3 seasons, but it's definitely the best one we got this season.
Bitch! Ah! Oh no! What have I done? I'm a terrible pet owner! Terrible! Karen! We're gonna need another Spot! Nice rebound, Spot!
Goodbye, Krabby Patty. In this half-hour special, Krabs gets the idea to sell frozen Krabby Patties in the supermarket, and in the process, it changes the Krusty Krab and cooked patties into a forgotten relic. But Mr. Krabs, being a bit of a greedy businessman, ends up taking bigger risks by changing the formula and adding filler to it, that being sand. On top of that, the marketing campaign hires Patrick for the multiple different commercials for the frozen patties, and this causes a rift between SpongeBob and Patrick as he has 0 time to spend with him. That's 3 times in a row where a special has cracked the top spot on my best list. I did not plan that at all. When I first saw the advertisement for this special, I was actually pretty curious on how it would go down. I was kind of hoping we wouldn't go down the route of SpongeBob You're Fired, and thankfully it didn't go down that route. We ended up getting a special that actually felt a lot more dramatic than what I was expecting. The whole commentary on the food business is interesting. Like, I generally buy a lot of the characters' actions in this episode, especially Mr. Krabs. On top of that, the episode does also crack in a few funny moments. Although the whole running gag about the big butts was not my thing. But the rest isn't all that. I think what really stands out about this episode is how much has changed thanks to the frozen Krabby Patties. Like how Patrick being a part of the marketing business takes away the time he could spend with SpongeBob. And it also makes sense for the customers to want the frozen patties over the original. I personally prefer homemade or store-bought foods, but it's true that fast food can be so tempting at times. I mean, sometimes I heat up my store-bought foods, Or at times I may have something like Wendy's or McDonald's. I'm pretty sure we've all been there before. All these aspects make for some really interesting drama. It's not all trying to be laughs and giggles. Sure, they mostly try to crack in humor, but that's to be expected in something like Spongebob. And I think all of this makes for a really enjoyable and entertaining episode. And I definitely consider it the highlight of Season 9. Sure, it's not flawless, but rarely anything is.
I have a slogan. Krabby Patties taste so nice that they taste nice.
So those were my favorite episodes of Season 9. I do apologize for the gap between the Season 8 list and this one. I've been pretty busy for most of the time. I've been working a bit more in my sophomore year of college. I've gone aboard the Disney Fantasy back in January. I've been working a bit more with my fandub project and providing voiceovers for other projects. And I've also started working on what might just be my biggest project on the channel. But I'm trying to see if I can work around that, as I do have 3 more seasons to go through until I'm all caught up. But I want to thank you all for your patience and support. Anyways, what are your favorites and least favorites of Season 9? Let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll see you all next time with the Season 10 list.